I want to start by asking you a question. What do you do when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hand the wolf the key to the front door? What do you do when they lock you out and tell you the howling you hear is just the wind? You're not supposed to answer. Not yet. You're supposed to listen. Because for the longest time I didn't have a voice, and now it's all I have left. My story doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a quiet dimming, the slow, heartbreaking fade of a brilliant mind. My father, Henry, was a giant. Not in stature, but in presence. He was a man who could command a boardroom with a single raised eyebrow and then spend hours patiently teaching me how to rig a sailboat. His mind was a library of history, finance, and terrible, wonderful dad jokes. But time is a cruel thief, and it began stealing books from that library, one by one. First it was small things. Forgetting a name, misplacing his keys. Then it was bigger things. Getting lost on the way home from the grocery store he'd been going to for 40 years. I was the one who was there for it. I'm Ben. I live just 10 minutes from the old family home in Chestnut Hill, the house my father built, not just with money, but with his own 2 hands on the weekends. My siblings, they'd moved on and up. My older sister, Kate, was a partner at a downtown law firm, living in a sleek, minimalist condo that looked like it was staged for a magazine shoot. My older brother Mark was a self-proclaimed serial entrepreneur, which meant he was serially starting businesses with Dad's money that never quite seemed to turn a profit. And then there was Leo, the baby of the family, a sensitive soul who was perpetually finding himself and funding his journey with a steady allowance from the bank of Dad. So I was the one on the ground. I was the one who got the late-night calls when Dad was confused. I was the one who started managing his appointments, making sure his prescriptions were filled, and sitting with him through long, quiet afternoons. It was a burden, yes, but it was a burden of love. I never once complained. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about the man who had taught me everything. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about honoring his legacy while he was still with us. My family, however, saw it differently. To them, my presence was a complication, a constant reminder of a problem they preferred to solve with a single clean transaction. One Sunday, Kate called an emergency family meeting. Not at the family home, which was Dad's space, but at her cold, impersonal condo. I sat on a low white sofa that felt like it was designed to be uncomfortable, while Kate paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline behind her like a prop. Mark was checking his phone, and Leo was staring at his shoes. Ben, we need to talk about Dad. Kate began, her voice laced with that practiced authoritative tone she used on junior associates. It's just not sustainable. You have your own life, your own job. It's too much for you. I bristled. It's fine, Kate. I'm managing. No, you're not, she said, stopping to look at me. You're tired. You look stressed. And frankly, Dad needs professional care. Someone who knows how to handle his condition. Mark finally looked up from his phone. She's right, Ben. We've been talking. It's time to bring someone in. A full-time private caregiver. That's when they dropped her name. Nora. She comes highly recommended, Kate said, a little too brightly. From the Willinghams you know from the club. They said she was an absolute angel with their father before he passed. Handled everything. His finances, his medical care, everything. It would ease your burden so much. The phrase hung in the air. Ease your burden. It sounded like a kindness, but it felt like a dismissal. They weren't doing this for me. They were doing it for themselves, to absolve themselves of the messy, inconvenient reality of our father's decline. I argued. I told them it was too soon, that a stranger in the house would confuse him, that we could handle it as a family. But it was 3 against 1. It was always 3 against 1. I was the overly emotional one, the one who couldn't be objective. They voted, and just like that, my role as my father's primary support system was outsourced. Nora arrived 2 days later. She was everything they'd promised. She was in her late 40s, with a warm, disarming smile and kind eyes that seemed to radiate competence. She spoke in a soft, soothing voice, and in the first week she reorganized the entire house, labeled all of Dad's medications, and started cooking these incredible meals that made the old house smell like home again. She called me with regular updates, always cheerful, always professional. Henry had a good day, she'd say. We sat in the garden for an hour. My siblings were ecstatic. See, Ben, isn't she amazing? Kate would say during our weekly calls. It's such a relief. Now we know he's in the best possible hands. But then things started to change. Slowly at first. When I'd call to speak to Dad, Nora would often answer. "Oh, he's just resting now, Ben. It's not a good time." When I'd drop by after work, the visits became shorter, more supervised. "We don't want to disrupt his routine," Nora would say, with that same gentle smile, guiding me to the door. "He gets agitated when his schedule is off." Soon the excuses became more pointed. "He was asking for your mother again today," Nora told me one afternoon, her voice filled with pity. "I think seeing you sometimes, well, it just confuses him more. He thinks you're a younger version of himself. It's very disorienting for him." I felt a cold dread creeping into my gut. I tried to talk to Kate about it. "She's limiting my access, Kate. I barely get to see him anymore." Her sigh was heavy with impatience. "Ben, she's a professional. You're being too sensitive. She knows what's best for him. He's confused. She's trying to maintain a calm environment. Can you please for once not make this about you?" It wasn't about me, it was about my father, a prisoner in his own home, and I was being told the bars on his windows were for his own good. The family I thought I had, the one I thought would pull together in a crisis, was actively pushing me away, choosing the comforting lies of a stranger over the inconvenient truths of their own brother. They called it care. I was starting to think it was something else entirely. I just didn't have a name for it yet. And then yesterday morning, the world tilted on its axis. I was at my desk, trying to focus on a spreadsheet, when an alert popped up on my phone. It was from a notification service I'd set up years ago, an alert for high-value items with specific serial numbers appearing in online marketplaces or pawn databases. I'd created it half as a joke after my apartment was broken into, to track my grandfather's camera. I'd forgotten all about it. The alert was for a Patek Philippe watch, serial number 7J4881B. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a watch, it was the watch, my grandfather's watch, passed down to my father on his wedding day. It was made of rose gold, with a moon phase complication, and the back was engraved, "Henry for all of time. Love, Dad." My father never took it off. It was a part of him. The alert said it had been sold less than an hour ago. At a pawn shop downtown. A place called Gold and Silver Exchange. My hands were shaking as I dialed Kate's number. She answered on the third ring. Her voice clipped. "Ben, I'm about to walk into a deposition." "What is it?" "The watch," I stammered. "Dad's watch. It's been sold. I just got an alert. Someone sold it at a pawn shop downtown." Silence. Then a weary sigh that scraped against my soul. "Oh, for God's sake, Ben. Are you serious? Dad probably misplaced it. He's been doing that a lot lately. You know that." "No, Kate, you don't understand. It was sold an hour ago. I have the name of the shop." "Okay, well, Nora probably found it and put it somewhere safe," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Or maybe Dad asked her to get it appraised for insurance. Did you think of that? You're jumping to the absolute worst conclusion. As usual. You're being paranoid." Paranoid. That was the word. The label they'd slapped on me to dismiss any concern that pricked their comfortable bubble. Why would he have it appraised at a pawn shop? I shot back, my voice rising. "Kate, listen to me. Something is wrong." "What's wrong?" she said, her voice turning to ice. "Is that you're trying to undermine the best thing that's happened to this family in years. Nora is a saint. You need to stop this." "I have to go." She hung up. I just stood there in my office, the phone buzzing in my hand. A saint. They called her a saint. But saints don't pawn family heirlooms. I looked at the alert again. Sold. Gone. The symbol of my father's entire life, of his father's life, turned into a quick pile of cash by a stranger my family had invited into our home. They thought I was paranoid. But in that moment, I knew with a chilling certainty that I wasn't paranoid enough. Nora wasn't a caregiver. She was a predator, and my family hadn't just invited her in. They had served our father up to her on a silver platter. And the worst part, I knew right then and there that I was completely, utterly alone. The fight to save my father wouldn't be a family affair. It would be me against them all. The silence after Kate hung up was deafening. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. A final, definitive click that locked me on the outside. For a few minutes I just stood in my apartment. The city noise outside my window feeling a million miles away. My world had shrunk to the four walls of that room and the cold, sick knot twisting in my stomach. Paranoid. The word echoed in my head. A brand they had seared onto me. It was their get-out-of-jail-free card. The magic word that absolved them of any responsibility to listen, to think, to protect their own father. I grabbed my keys and my wallet. My movements jerky and uncoordinated. I didn't have a plan, just a furious, desperate need to do something. I drove to the family house, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The quiet, tree-lined streets of the neighborhood, usually a source of comfort, now felt sinister. Every manicured lawn, every stately brick home seemed to be part of a facade, a perfect picture hiding a dark secret. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Nora through the big bay window, moving around in the kitchen. She looked so normal, so domestic. I walked up the stone path my father and I had laid one summer and rang the doorbell. Nora opened it, her face breaking into that familiar warm smile. But this time, it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were like polished stones, smooth and unreadable. "Ben, what a surprise. I'm afraid it's not a great time. Henry's just about to have his afternoon nap." "I'm not here to see him, Nora," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "I'm here for you. Where is my father's watch?" Her smile didn't falter, but a tiny muscle in her jaw twitched. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. The watch? Oh goodness. He was looking for that the other day. I'm afraid he's probably put it away somewhere for safekeeping and forgotten where. You know how he is. "Don't lie to me," I said, stepping forward. "I know it was sold, this morning, at a pawn shop downtown. I want to know why." Her expression shifted instantly from warm caregiver to concerned professional dealing with an unstable family member. She held up her hands in a placating gesture. "Ben, please, you're getting worked up. Your father sold the watch himself. He was very clear about it." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "What are you talking about? He would never sell that watch." "He was worried about money," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He was concerned about the cost of his care, about being a burden. He insisted. He said it was just a thing, and his family's security was more important." It was a very lucid moment for him. He signed the bill of sale himself. He asked me to handle the transaction because he didn't want to cause a fuss. It was a brilliant lie. A masterpiece of manipulation. It painted my father as a noble, self-sacrificing man, and me as the sentimental fool who couldn't see the bigger picture. It was so plausible, so perfectly designed to prey on my family's pre-existing narrative about me. "I don't believe you," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I want to talk to him." "I don't think that's a good idea," she said, blocking the doorway. "You're agitated, and it will only upset him." Kate was very clear that I am to maintain a calm environment for him. And there it was, Kate's authority, weaponized against me. Before I could argue, my brother Leo's car pulled into the driveway. He got out, a bag of groceries in his arms, and his face fell when he saw me. "Ben, what's going on?" he asked, looking from my face to Nora's. "Ben is a little upset about your father's watch," Nora said, turning to Leo with an expression of deep concern. "Your father made the decision to sell it to help with expenses, and Ben is having a hard time accepting it." Leo looked at me, his expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "Ben, come on. We talked about this. You can't keep doing this." "Doing what, Leo?" "Trying to protect our father." "No, creating drama," he snapped, his voice cracking. "Everything was fine. Everything was calm and stable. And now you're here on the doorstep yelling at the one person who has brought any peace to this house. Just leave it alone, please." He walked past me, into the house, and Nora gave me one last look, a look of pure triumphant pity. before she closed the door in my face. I stood there on the porch, the solid oak of the door like a tombstone. They were a united front, a fortress of denial, and I was the enemy at the gate. I walked back to my car, defeated. The drive home was a blur. My mind was a maelstrom of memories, trying to find an anchor, something to explain how we got here. I remembered being a kid, sitting on the floor of my father's study, while he worked at his big mahogany desk. He'd let me hold the watch. It was heavy in my small hands, the gold warm against my skin. He'd shown me how the tiny moon on the dial tracked the real moon in the sky. "It's a little piece of magic, Benny," he'd said. "It connects you to the universe, and it connects you to me, and to my father. It's not about the time it tells, it's about the time it's seen." How could a man who said that ever see it as just a thing? I thought about Kate. Even as kids, she was the general. We'd play games in the backyard, and she would organize everything, delegating roles, creating rules. I was always the lookout, the one sent to the periphery. Mark was her second in command, and Leo was the protected asset we all had to look after. It was our family dynamic in miniature. She wasn't malicious, not then. She just had this unshakable belief in her own judgment. She decided what was best, and any deviation from her plan was treated as a rebellion. When I got into a top university for engineering, while she was slogging through law school, she'd been politely congratulatory, but there was a coolness there. I'd broken from the script. I was supposed to be the sensitive, slightly lost one she could manage. My success was an inconvenient data point. The pattern was always the same. When I started my own small engineering consulting firm, working 60-hour weeks to get it off the ground, my father was my biggest cheerleader. He invested a small amount, not because I needed it, but because he wanted to be a part of it. He loved hearing about the projects, the challenges. At family dinners, I'd try to talk about a breakthrough I'd had, and Kate would inevitably cut in. "That's nice, Ben. Did I tell you guys I made partner?" And the conversation would shift, my achievement relegated to a footnote. Mark would chime in about his next venture, seeking Dad's approval and capital, and Leo would talk about his art. I was the responsible one, the stable one, and in my family's eyes, that made me the boring one. My stability was taken for granted, like the foundation of a house that no one thinks about until it cracks. I was the one who noticed Dad was starting to slip. I'd find unpaid bills on his desk. He'd tell me the same story 3 times in one visit. I brought it up to Kate gently. "I'm worried about Dad. I think we need to get him checked out. He's just getting older, Ben," she'd said, waving it away. "Don't be so dramatic." But it got worse. I stepped in, taking over his bill payments, setting up his doctor's appointments. I never made a fuss about it. I just did it. And in their eyes, because I handled it quietly, it wasn't a real problem. My quiet management of the situation allowed them to live in denial. The day they announced they were hiring Nora, they framed it as a gift to me. "You've done so much, Ben," Mark had said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Time for you to take a break." It wasn't a break. It was an expulsion. They didn't want a brother managing the problem. They wanted a professional to erase it. I got back to my apartment and collapsed onto my couch. The anger was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching grief. Grief for the father I was losing twice, once to his illness, and again to this conspiracy of convenience. I felt like I was going crazy. Was Kate right? Was I just paranoid? Had my father really sold the watch? The thought was a physical blow. Maybe his mind was so far gone that he could be convinced of anything. Maybe that was even worse. I must have sat there for hours. The sun went down, and the city lights came on, but I didn't move. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a text from Kate. "I spoke to Nora. She's very upset. I can't believe you would accuse her of stealing. You owe her an apology, and you need to stay away from the house for a while. You're a destabilizing influence." A destabilizing influence. That's what I was. The grit in the gears of their well-oiled machine of denial. I stared at the message, the blue light of the screen illuminating the darkness. And that's when something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, violent break, but a quiet, cold fracture.
The grief and confusion congealed into something hard and sharp. Resolve. They were wrong. I wasn't paranoid. I was the only one paying attention, and if they wouldn't listen to me, I would have to make them see. I stood up and walked over to my laptop. I had to know for sure. I drove downtown. The pawn shop was in a grimy part of the city, wedged between a bail bondsman and a boarded-up check-cashing place. The windows were barred, and a neon sign flickered. Gold and silver exchange. I took a deep breath and went inside. The man behind the thick plexiglass was old, with a weary face and tired eyes. He looked up from his newspaper, unimpressed. "Help you?" he grunted. "I'm here about a watch," I said, my voice steady. "A Patek Philippe. It was sold here this morning." He held up a hand. "Can't discuss transactions. Policy." "It belonged to my father," I said, pulling out my phone. I showed him a picture from my brother Mark's last wedding. Dad was beaming, his arm around me, and on his wrist, the rose gold watch was clearly visible. "This man, he's sick. He has dementia. He wouldn't have sold this watch, not in his right mind."
The owner squinted at the picture, then at me. He was silent for a long moment. He seemed to be weighing the hassle against something else, maybe a flicker of decency. He let out a long, slow sigh. "Look, kid, I can't give you the watch. It's a legal transaction. But the lady who sold it, she wasn't old. She was a nice-looking woman, mid to late 40s, said it was part of an estate she was managing." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Nora, did you get her name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He grunted again, turning to his computer. He typed for a moment. "Had to see her driver's license. Standard procedure for a sale this big." He turned the monitor slightly. Name on the license was Helen Stratton. Paid her out in cash, per her request. Helen Stratton, not Nora, not the name my family had. A different name entirely. A real name, from a real ID. This was it. This was the key. This was the first solid piece of the truth, in a sea of lies. "Thank you," I said, the words catching in my throat. "Thank you." He just nodded, already turning back to his newspaper. I walked out of that shop and back into the cool night air, but I wasn't cold anymore. I was burning. The feeling wasn't rage, not anymore. It was a cold, clean fire. It wasn't about revenge, not really, not at first. It was about justice. It was about saving my father from the monster they'd welcomed into his home. But as I stood there on that dirty sidewalk, the name Helen Stratton echoing in my mind, a new thought began to form. Maybe, just maybe, it could be about both. They wanted me to be a destabilizing influence. Fine, I would be a goddamn earthquake. The name Helen Stratton was a weapon. It felt heavy in my mind, a dense metallic thing I could finally use to chip away at the wall of lies Nora had built. Back in my apartment, the despair that had paralyzed me was gone, replaced by a humming, focused energy. The first thing I did was call my best friend, David. David and I had been friends since college, roommates who had survived engineering school on a diet of cheap pizza and sheer stubbornness. He was now a partner at a risk management firm, a job that essentially involved being professionally paranoid, which suddenly felt like the most valuable skill in the world. He picked up on the first ring. "Ben, you sound weird. What's up?" I didn't waste time. I laid it all out. Nora, the watch, the pawn shop, the fake name. I expected him to be shocked, but David's reaction was eerily calm. He just listened. A long silence on the other end of the line as I unloaded the whole ugly story. When I finally finished, his voice was grim. "Okay, so she's a pro. This isn't her first rodeo. My family thinks I'm crazy, Dave. Kate told me to stay away from the house. Your family is emotionally compromised," he said, his tone clinical. "They want to believe in the easy solution, because the alternative is too horrible to contemplate. It's not about you, it's about them. But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is what we do next. You can't go at this alone, and you can't go at it loud. You need a plan." "I know," I said. "That's why I called you." "First things first," David said, and I could hear the faint click of his keyboard in the background. "You need a private investigator. Not some sleazy guy who digs through trash, but a real professional, someone with a background in financial forensics. I know a guy. His name is Miller. Ex-FBI, white-collar crime. He's expensive, but he's surgical. I'll make the call. Second, you need a lawyer. A bulldog. Someone who specializes in elder law and financial exploitation. I know one of those too. Miss Albright. She eats people like your sister for breakfast. Don't talk to your family. Don't talk to Nora. From this moment on, you are a ghost. You document everything, you gather evidence, and you don't make a move until we have an ironclad case. Hearing him lay it out so clearly felt like a lifeline. The chaos in my mind began to organize itself into a mission. A ghost. I could do that. I had been feeling like one for weeks anyway. The next day I met Miller in a quiet coffee shop. He was a compact man in his 50s, with a completely forgettable face and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't say much. He just listened, took notes in a small black book, and asked a few pointed questions. What was the name she gave your family? Nora. No last name. Kate said she was a referral from a family at their country club, the Willinghams. Miller jotted it down. I'll check on the Willinghams first. See if they actually exist, and if so, whether their father died under the care of an angel named Nora. He looked up at me. My gut says he didn't. He was right. 2 days later, Miller called me. The Willinghams are real. Their father passed away 2 years ago. They had a team of nurses from a licensed agency. They've never heard of a woman named Nora. Your sister was lied to, or she's lying to you. The confirmation sent a chill down my spine. So the entire foundation of Nora's presence was a lie. Miller's work after that was fast and brutally efficient. With the name Helen Stratton, he unlocked her entire history. She was a ghost online, but public records don't lie, if you know where to look. He uncovered a trail of name changes, addresses in 3 different states, always in affluent communities. He then cross-referenced those addresses with obituaries of wealthy, elderly men who had died in those areas within the last 10 years. The pattern emerged, stark and terrifying. First, there was a man named Marcus Thorne in Scottsdale, Arizona. Died at 82. His obituary mentioned his devoted companion, Elena. A few months after his death, his children were shocked to discover his multi-million-dollar art collection had been sold off and his estate was nearly bankrupt. They sued, but Elena had vanished. Then there was Richard Gallagher in Palm Beach, Florida. Died at 85. His final months were spent with a caring friend, Hannah. After he passed, his family found that his properties had been heavily mortgaged and the funds transferred to an offshore account. The trail went cold. The third case was the most recent, just before she came to Boston. A man named Samuel Croft in Greenwich, Connecticut. He had 2 sons. His obituary thanked his tireless caregiver, Nicole. After his death, the sons found themselves cut out of the will entirely. The new will, signed just weeks before their father's death, left everything to Nicole. They fought it in court, claiming undue influence and cognitive impairment. But the paperwork was pristine. The caregiver had a power of attorney document, signed and notarized. The sons ran out of money fighting it, and had to give up. 3 men, 3 fortunes, 4 fake names, including Nora, and 1 real one. Helen Stratton. Miller's final report was a clinical, horrifying portrait of a predator. She's a pro, he told me over the phone. She's not just a common thief, she's a sociopath. She finds wealthy families with existing fractures, jealousy between siblings, denial about a parent's health. She exploits those weaknesses. She isolates the patriarch, gains their trust, gets them to sign over power of attorney, and then she liquidates. She knows the law just well enough to make it look legitimate. By the time the family figures it out, the money is gone, and she's a ghost, ready to reappear in a new city, with a new name. Every word was a nail in the coffin of my family's delusion. But evidence of past behavior wasn't enough. We needed to connect Helen Stratton to Nora, and we needed to find someone who could testify to her methods. The Croft case is our best bet, Miller said. The sons. They fought her. They know her face. If you can get one of them to talk, you have a living witness. He gave me the names, Daniel and Garrett Croft. Daniel, the older one, had moved to Europe after the legal battle, seemingly to escape the whole mess. But Garrett, the younger son, was still in Connecticut, working a construction job. He had lost everything, his inheritance, his family home, His father. Miller warned me he would be a tough nut to crack. He was bitter and didn't trust anyone, especially not people from a world he felt had chewed him up and spit him out. Finding him was the next step. I drove the 2 hours to the small town in Connecticut, where Garrett lived. I found him on a residential construction site, hauling lumber. He was about my age, but he looked older. His face was etched with a permanent scowl, and his eyes were full of a deep, weary anger that I recognized immediately. I waited until his lunch break and approached him. Garrett Croft. He looked up, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Who's asking? My name is Ben. I need to talk to you about your father, and about a woman who called herself Nicole. His entire body went rigid. He dropped the sandwich he was holding and took a step towards me, his hands clenching into fists. I've got nothing to say about that. Get the hell off this site before I throw you off. She's doing it again, I said quickly, holding my ground. To my father. In Boston. This time her name is Nora, but her real name is Helen Stratton. The name hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. For a second, the anger in his eyes was replaced by a flash of raw pain. So you found her, he said, his voice a low growl. Good for you. What do you want from me? A medal? A pat on the back? I want your help, I said. I'm building a case against her. A real one. I have a PI, a lawyer. We have evidence of her other victims, but you're the only one who fought her in court. You saw her face. You know what she did. Your testimony could be the thing that finally stops her. He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Testimony. You think a court cares? We had evidence. We had doctors' reports showing my dad wasn't in his right mind. But she had a piece of paper, a power of attorney, and a will, and in the eyes of the law, a piece of paper signed by a confused old man is worth more than the truth. She bankrupted us, trying to fight her. We lost everything. The house I grew up in. Everything. And you want me to go through that again? For you? No thanks. He turned to walk away, and I felt a wave of desperation. He was my key. My one chance. It wasn't about the money for you, was it? I called after him. He stopped, his back still to me. It was about your father. I continued, my voice thick with emotion. It was about how she stole him from you before he even died. How she isolated him and turned him against you. How she made you the villain in your own family's story. That's what she's doing to me, Garrett. She's telling my family I'm paranoid. She's telling them I'm a destabilizing influence. She's making them choose her over me. And they're doing it. He slowly turned around. The anger was gone, replaced by a shared haunted look. He saw it. He saw that I wasn't just some rich kid trying to get his inheritance back. I was him. I was living the nightmare he had just survived. She made my brother and me stop speaking, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. She told my dad I was stealing from his company. She told Daniel I was trying to get Dad committed so I could take over. She found the one tiny crack between us and drove a wedge into it until she shattered everything. I know, I said. That's what she does. We stood there for a long moment in the mud and sawdust of that construction site, two strangers bound by the same invisible enemy. What's your plan? He finally asked, his voice low. My lawyer says we can file for an emergency conservatorship. I explained. We present the evidence to a judge, her aliases, the pattern of fraud, the pawned watch. We ask the court to freeze all of my father's assets immediately, to stop the bleeding. Then we use that time to build the full case for the final hearing. If you would be willing to submit an affidavit, maybe even testify. He was quiet for a long time, staring at the half-built house behind me. She has to be stopped, he finally whispered, more to himself than to me. I don't want anyone else to go through what my family went through. He looked at me, his eyes clear and hard for the first time. Okay, Ben. I'm in. Tell me what you need. The relief that washed over me was so intense my knees felt weak. I had my evidence. I had my lawyer. And now, I had my star witness. I had Garrett. The silent part of the plan was over. It was time to make my first move. It was time to start the earthquake. The decision to act felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark. I had spent weeks operating in the shadows, gathering information, building my case piece by painstaking piece. Now, it was time to bring it into the light, and I knew the moment I did, all hell would break loose. But David, Miller, and my new lawyer, Miss Albright, were all in agreement. We had to move before Nora, or Helen Stratton, could liquidate the major assets, like the house or my father's stock portfolio. Miss Albright was a force of nature. She was a woman in her 60s, with sharp gray hair, sharper eyes, and a complete intolerance for nonsense. Our meeting took place in her Spartan office, which was lined with law books instead of art. She reviewed Miller's entire file, her expression unreadable. She read Garrett's signed and notarized affidavit twice. Finally, she looked up at me over the top of her reading glasses. "Mr. Dawson, your family has been monumentally stupid." It was the most validating thing I had heard in months. This woman, this Helen Stratton, is a professional parasite. But she's a careful one. The power of attorney, she had your father sign, is her shield. A direct confrontation is what she expects. She would use it to paint you as hysterical and greedy, and she would accelerate her efforts to drain the accounts. "So what do?" I asked. "We don't play her game, we change the entire board," Miss Albright said, a grim smile touching her lips. "We are going to file an emergency petition for a temporary conservatorship over your father, Henry Dawson, and his estate. We will file it ex parte, which means we are asking the judge to grant it without the other party, in this case, your siblings and Nora, being present or notified beforehand. They can do that. In cases of suspected elder abuse and imminent financial harm, yes," she explained. "We will argue that notifying them would give the alleged abuser, Nora, the opportunity to cause irreparable damage. We will present the evidence of her multiple aliases, the pattern of behavior established by Miller, and the sworn testimony from Garrett Croft. We will attach the pawn shop receipt for your father's watch. We are not asking the judge to rule on the entire case, merely to recognize the extreme risk and to freeze everything until a full hearing can be held. We will freeze his bank accounts, his brokerage accounts, his credit cards, and we will place a temporary lien on the title of the house. We are going to turn off the spigot. Completely. Turn off the spigot." The phrase was perfect. Nora had inserted herself into the heart of my family, controlling the flow of money, and with it, their loyalty. We weren't just going to stop her, we were going to create a drought. 2 days later, Miss Albright filed the petition. The waiting was agonizing. I spent the day pacing my apartment, my phone in my hand, jumping at every notification. Finally, at 4 o'clock, I got the call. "We have it," Miss Albright said, her voice calm and professional. "The judge has signed the order. The court clerk is transmitting it to all the relevant financial institutions as we speak. The accounts will be frozen within the hour. The lien is being filed with the county. The spigot, Mr. Dawson, is officially off. A hearing for a permanent conservatorship has been set for 3 weeks from today. Now, prepare yourself. The blowback is about to begin." I didn't have to wait long. The first sign that the earthquake had hit came around 7 p.m. It was a text from my younger brother Leo. My card was just declined at the grocery store. Super embarrassing. "Is there something wrong with Dad's account?" I stared at the text. I typed a reply and then deleted it. David and Miss Albright had been clear. Say nothing. Let them discover the truth from the system, not from me. Silence was my new weapon. An hour later, my phone exploded. It was a group call from Kate and Mark. I let it go to voicemail. Then another, then a flood of frantic texts. "Kate, Ben, call me immediately. This is not a joke." Mark, "What the hell did you do?" Nora just tried to pay the gardener, and her card was declined. Kate, "I just got off the phone with the bank. They said there's a court order, freezing Dad's accounts." "A court order, Ben, they said you filed it." Mark,
You went behind our backs and froze our father's assets. Are you insane? How is Nora supposed to pay for his medicine? His food? Kate, this is elder abuse. I'm a lawyer, Ben. I know what this is. You are interfering with his care. I will have you sanctioned. I will have you disbarred from this family. The accusations were a torrent of panic and rage. They didn't ask why I'd done it. They didn't pause to consider that maybe, just maybe, my paranoia had a foundation. They went straight to assuming I was the villain. Their world had been disrupted, their comfortable arrangement threatened, and they lashed out at the source of the disruption, not the cause of the disease. The most telling message came from Nora herself. It wasn't a text, but an email. It was a masterpiece of manipulative prose. Subject: urgent concern for Henry dear. Ben, I am writing to you with a heavy heart. I was so distressed to learn from Kate what has transpired. I know you are acting from a place of love and concern for your father, but I fear this action, however well-intentioned, will have devastating consequences for his health and well-being. The disruption to his routine, the inability to procure his necessary supplies and medications, it is already causing him a great deal of anxiety. I consider it a sacred trust to care for Henry. He is a wonderful man. If there is some misunderstanding, something I have done to upset you, I implore you to speak with me directly so we can resolve it. My only concern is your father's peace. Yours in care, Nora. It was perfect. Calm, reasonable, full of concern. She was already building her case against me, positioning herself as the devoted caregiver caught in the crossfire of a dysfunctional family. She was trying to lure me into a dialogue where she could twist my words, but I wasn't falling for it. I forwarded the email to Miss Albright with a single note. Exhibit A. I turned my phone on silent and put it in a drawer. The silence in my apartment was a stark contrast to the storm I knew was raging outside. I felt a strange sense of calm. The first move was made. The board was set. They were all panicking, running around in the dark, trying to figure out why the lights had gone out. They had no idea that I was the one who had quietly flipped the master switch. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. The takeover wasn't loud or violent. It was silent. It was legal. And it was absolute. The next few weeks were going to be a war. But for the first time, I felt like I had the ammunition to win it.
The 3 weeks leading up to the court hearing were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My family, accustomed to a world that bent to their will, was completely unprepared for a world with consequences. The frozen accounts weren't just an inconvenience, they were an existential threat to the lifestyle they had built on the foundation of my father's generosity. The panic that had started with declined credit cards quickly escalated. Mark was the first to truly unravel. He had been counting on a significant investment from Dad, facilitated by Nora, to launch his latest doomed venture, some kind of artisanal kombucha delivery service. He called me, his voice a tight wire of fury. "You've ruined me, Ben. Do you understand that? I had investors lined up, contracts ready to sign. Everything was contingent on that seed money. It's all gone. The money wasn't yours to begin with, Mark," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. It was the first time I had spoken to any of them since flipping the switch. Miss Albright had advised me to remain silent, but this was a call I felt I needed to take. It was my inheritance. He yelled. "Dad promised me. Nora had it all arranged. Nora arranged to steal it." "You mean," I said flatly. "You should be thanking me." He just sputtered, a stream of incoherent rage, before hanging up. He saw me not as a savior, but as the thief who had stolen what he was about to steal. The irony was suffocating. Kate's approach was different. She tried to use her legal knowledge as a weapon. She left me a long, rambling voicemail detailing all the ways she was going to sue me. She threatened motions to vacate the judge's order, lawsuits for tortious interference, and even tried to claim I was mentally incompetent. "I have years of your emails, Ben," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "All your emotional overreactions. I will prove to the court that you are unstable and acting out of spite. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The threat was hollow. She was a corporate lawyer. This was not her world. and she had no idea who she was dealing with in Miss Albright. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer. Her emailed response was succinct: let her try. It will be amusing. But it was Leo, my younger brother, who represented the most heartbreaking fallout. He was the soft one, the one who had always been sheltered. His entire adult life had been subsidized. He called me one night, and he was crying. "Ben, my landlord just gave me an eviction notice," he sobbed. "The rent was due last week. Nora always just paid it directly from Dad's account. I don't have any money. I'm going to be homeless." A part of me, the old Ben, the family caretaker, felt a sharp pang of sympathy. It would have been so easy to say, "Don't worry, Leo. I'll cover it." But Miss Albright's words echoed in my head. "Do not plug the leak. The only way they will understand the scope of the problem is to feel the effects of the drought." "I'm sorry to hear that, Leo," I said, and I truly was. "That sounds terrible. Can you help me?" he pleaded. "Just this once. I'll pay you back, I swear." "I can't, Leo," I said, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to say. "This isn't about you or your rent. This is about protecting Dad. The person you should be calling is Nora. Or Kate. Kate is the one who hired her. Kate is the one who vouched for her. This is their mess. They need to be the ones to clean it up." He was silent for a moment, just the sound of his ragged breathing. "I can't believe you're doing this to us," he whispered, and hung up. That call cost me a night of sleep. Was I being too harsh? Was I punishing him for the sins of our siblings? But as I lay awake, I realized this was the core of the problem. For years I had been the family shock absorber, quietly shielding them from the consequences of their own choices. My enabling had been mistaken for love. The only way to truly help any of them was to let them finally hit the bottom. Meanwhile, Nora was getting desperate. Miller had a man watching the house, and the reports were fascinating. Cars from high-end consignment shops were showing up, likely to appraise the furniture and art. Nora was trying to liquidate everything that wasn't nailed down, but the court order was a shield. She couldn't sell anything that was legally part of the estate. Her most desperate move came a week before the hearing. She tried to get my father to a private clinic outside the state. Miller's guy saw the medical transport vehicle pull up. I got the call at work and immediately phoned Miss Albright. Within 20 minutes, she had a sheriff's deputy at the house with a court order reinforcing that my father was not to be moved from his primary residence without judicial approval. Nora, a master of staying in the shadows, had finally overplayed her hand and come into direct conflict with the law. She was trapped. The counter-manipulation reached its peak a few days before the hearing. Kate orchestrated a full court press. She had my aunt, my uncle, even a few of my father's old business partners call me. The script was always the same. "Ben, your father is suffering. This conflict is hurting him. Whatever your issues are with your siblings, you need to put them aside for his sake. Drop this ridiculous lawsuit." They were using my love for my father as a weapon against me, trying to guilt me into surrendering. But every call just strengthened my resolve. They didn't see that the conflict was for my father's sake. The most insidious attempt came from Kate herself. She sent me a long, heartfelt email. It was a complete change in tone. She apologized for being dismissive. She said maybe she had been too quick to trust Nora, that she was just so overwhelmed and wanted what was best. She proposed a compromise. "Let's you and I sit down with Nora and an independent mediator," she wrote. "We can look at the finances together. We can put new controls in place. We can resolve this as a family without the ugliness of court. Just drop the conservatorship petition. Let's go back to how things were." It was a beautiful, tempting trap. A siren song of family unity. The old Ben would have jumped at it. But the new Ben saw it for what it was. A desperate attempt to get me to lower my guard, to get the accounts unfrozen so Nora could finish her work and disappear. It was a power shift, but not the one she thought. She was no longer dictating terms. She was begging. I sent the email to Miss Albright. Her response was a single word: pathetic. I didn't reply to Kate. I didn't reply to anyone. My silence was my answer. The power had shifted entirely. For my whole life, they had controlled the narrative, the finances, the very definition of our family. By simply turning off the money and holding up a mirror to their choices, I had caused their entire world to crumble. They were flailing, desperate, trying every tactic they had ever used on me: guilt, anger, intimidation, false affection. And for the first time, none of it was working. They were powerless. The family exodus wasn't them leaving me. It was the foundation of their lives eroding out from under them, and they were the only ones who didn't see that they had been the ones to dynamite the rock it was built on. The morning of the hearing, I put on my best suit. It felt like armor. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man looking back wasn't the same one from a month ago. The haunted, desperate look in my eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet certainty. It wasn't about revenge anymore. I told myself it was about rescue, but a small, honest part of me knew that wasn't entirely true. I wanted to see their faces when the truth finally came crashing down on them. I met Miss Albright at the courthouse. She gave me a crisp nod. "Ready, Mr. Dawson." "Ready," I said. Garrett was already there, sitting on a bench in the hallway. He looked nervous, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. He was wearing a suit that looked a little too big for him, probably the only one he owned. I walked over and sat down next to him. "Thank you for being here, Garrett," I said quietly. "I know this isn't easy." He looked at me, a flicker of the old anger in his eyes. "I'm not doing this for you, Ben. I'm doing it for my dad, and for yours. Let's go put this monster in a cage." When we walked into the courtroom, my family was already there. Kate, Mark and Leo sat at one table with Nora. They looked like a perfect, concerned family. Kate was whispering instructions to Nora, who was nodding, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue for effect. Mark was staring straight ahead, his jaw tight with anger. Leo just looked lost and small, like a child who had wandered into the wrong room. They all looked at me as I entered, their expressions a mixture of contempt and betrayal. I met Kate's glare and held it, refusing to look away. For the first time in my life, she was the one who broke eye contact. The hearing began. Kate's lawyer, a slick corporate attorney, who was clearly out of his depth, went first. He argued that the ex parte order was an abuse of process, that I, Ben Dawson, was a disgruntled and unstable family member with a history of emotional outbursts, and that I was attempting to seize control of my father's estate for my own personal gain. He painted Nora as a victim, a dedicated caregiver being slandered by a paranoid son. Kate took the stand. She was polished, articulate, and utterly convincing. She spoke of my erratic behavior, my jealousy over her close relationship with our father. She told the judge, with tears in her eyes, how Nora had brought peace and stability to a difficult situation, and how my actions had caused her father immense distress. It was a masterful performance. I could see the judge, a stern-looking woman in her late 60s, looking at me with a skeptical eye. I felt a flicker of doubt. Could they actually win this? Then it was Miss Albright's turn. She didn't begin with a fiery rebuttal. She began quietly, methodically. "Your Honor, we are here today because a wolf has been dressed in sheep's clothing. We intend to remove the disguise." She started with the evidence: the pawn shop ticket for the watch, the report from Miller detailing Nora's, or rather Helen Stratton's movements over the past decade. She presented the obituaries of Marcus Thorne, Richard Gallagher, and Samuel Croft. With each name, she presented evidence of a caregiver, with a different name, but a similar description: a sudden decline in the patriarch's health, and a mysteriously drained estate. Kate's lawyer kept objecting. "Hearsay, Your Honor, irrelevant." And each time, Miss Albright calmly responded, "We are establishing a pattern of behavior, Your Honor, modus operandi." And each time, the judge overruled the objection. The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension. I could see Mark shifting uncomfortably. Leo was pale. Kate maintained her composure, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. Nora sat perfectly still, her face a mask of wounded innocence. Then Miss Albright said, "The defense claims my client is paranoid and unstable, but his concerns were not born from paranoia. They were born from this." She placed a stack of papers on the witness stand: bank statements, credit card bills, all obtained via subpoena. "These documents show that in the 2 months Miss Stratton has been caring for Henry Dawson, over $200,000 in cash has been withdrawn from his accounts. His stock portfolio has been churned, generating high commissions for a broker we've discovered is an old associate of Miss Stratton. Credit cards have been opened in his name and maxed out on luxury goods. This is not care, Your Honor. This is theft. This is a systematic plundering. A gasp went through the courtroom. Kate stared at the documents, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, her mask of certainty cracked. And now, Your Honor, Miss Albright said, her voice ringing with authority. I would like to call a witness who can speak directly to the character and methods of the woman sitting at that table. The prosecution calls Mr. Garrett Croft to the stand. When Garrett walked to the stand, a wave of panic washed over Nora's face. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen from her. She recognized him. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing. Garrett told his story. He spoke not with anger, but with a deep, heartbreaking sadness. He detailed how Nicole had charmed his father, how she had slowly and systematically isolated him from his sons. He described finding forged checks, of discovering his father had signed a new will he couldn't possibly have understood. He talked about the legal battle, the financial ruin, and the destruction of his family. And the woman who did this to your family, Miss Albright asked, her voice gentle. Do you see her in this courtroom today? Garrett raised a shaking hand and pointed directly at Nora. Yes, he said, his voice cracking. She's sitting right there. It was over. I knew it in that instant. The entire courtroom was silent. Kate looked at Nora, truly looked at her, and the dawning horror on her face was terrible and wonderful to behold. The confident lawyer was gone, replaced by a woman who had just realized she had personally delivered her father into the hands of a monster. Mark looked like he was going to be physically ill. Leo was openly weeping. Nora, Helen, whatever her name was, finally broke. Her mask of composure shattered into a million pieces. She shot to her feet. He's lying, she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. They're all lying. It's a conspiracy. Ben paid him to say that. They're trying to steal the money. The judge banged her gavel. Order, Miss Stratton, sit down. But Nora couldn't stop. The panic had consumed her. Her tirade sealed her fate more effectively than any testimony could have. The mask was off. The wolf was snarling for everyone to see. The judge didn't need to deliberate. She granted me full permanent conservatorship of my father and his estate. She then looked sternly at Miss Albright. Counselor, I trust you will be forwarding your entire file on Miss Stratton to the district attorney's office. It's already on its way, Your Honor, Miss Albright said with a thin smile. As we walked out of the courtroom, my siblings stood clustered together, looking broken and lost. Kate took a step towards me, her face pale, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading look. Ben, I didn't know. I didn't slow down. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, then at Mark, then at Leo, and I walked right past them, out of the courtroom, and into the rest of my life. The new reality had begun. There was no triumphal shout, no grand speech. The victory was in the quiet click of the courtroom door closing behind me, shutting out their noise for good. In the aftermath, the chaos of the courtroom was replaced by a quiet, methodical process of reclamation. Nora, or Helen Stratton, was arrested that same afternoon. The district attorney, armed with Miss Albright's pristine file and Garrett's powerful testimony, moved quickly. It turned out she was wanted for questioning in Connecticut and Florida under different names. Her web of lies, so carefully woven over a decade, had unraveled in a single morning. The legal battle to claw back the money she had stolen and hidden in offshore accounts would be long and expensive. But the primary threat was gone. My father was safe. The first thing I did with my new authority as conservator was fire the entire household staff. Nora had hired the gardener, the cook, the cleaner. I didn't know who was complicit and who was just naive, and I couldn't take any chances. I hired a highly respected, fully vetted home care agency that specialized in dementia care. A team of 2 nurses, a kind, middle-aged woman named Sarah, and a gentle giant of a man named Paul, began working in shifts. They were professional, compassionate, and they sent me detailed reports every single day.
When I went back to the house for the first time after the hearing, it felt different. The lingering, cloying scent of Nora's perfume was gone. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared a simple soup for my father. I found him in the sunroom, sitting in his favorite armchair, looking out at the garden. He looked more peaceful than I had seen him in months. I sat down across from him. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. He turned his head and looked at me. For a moment, his eyes were clear, a flicker of recognition. "Benny," he said, his voice a frail whisper. He reached out his hand, and I took it. His grip was weak, but it was there. He didn't say anything else. He just held my hand and looked out at the trees. And in that moment, all the anger, all the bitterness of the past few months, just washed away. This was what it was all for. This quiet moment, this fragile connection. It was enough. My siblings, on the other hand, were facing a harsh new reality. The end of my father's financial support was not a temporary inconvenience. It was a permanent state of being. Kate, humiliated at work and in her social circle, took a leave of absence from her firm. The story of how she'd been duped, how her own brother had to save her father from a con artist she had hired, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit legal and social communities of Boston. Her arrogance, once seen as confidence, now looked like foolishness. Mark's artisanal kombucha business imploded before it even began. Without Dad's money, his other investors vanished. He had to sell his flashy car and move out of his expensive apartment. The last I heard, he was working for a logistics company, managing a warehouse, a real job, with a real boss, for the first time in his adult life. Leo's story was the one that stuck with me. He did get evicted. He called me one last time, not asking for money, but just to talk. He told me he was living on a friend's couch and had gotten a job as a barista. He sounded different, humbled. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "for years, I thought you were the one who was lost, Ben. The one who was just stuck here. But I was the one who was lost. I just had Dad's money to insulate me from it. You weren't stuck, you were anchored." They all sent letters, long, rambling letters, filled with apologies, excuses, and pleas for reconciliation. I put them in a drawer, unopened. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive them. It was that I understood, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that our old relationship was unsustainable. It was built on my silence, my compliance, my willingness to be the family shock absorber. Forgiveness couldn't rebuild that broken foundation. Only they could, by learning to stand on their own. It wasn't my job to fix them anymore. It was my job to protect my father and to heal myself. They called my actions paranoia, but I knew the truth. It wasn't paranoia. It was paying attention. I just wished, for their sake, that they had learned to do the same. And that brings me back to you, and to my question. What do you do when your family invites the wolf to the door? The answer, I've learned, is that you become the hunter. You don't do it with rage or with noise. You do it with quiet resolve, with cold facts, and with an unshakable belief in the truth, even when you're the only one who can see it. You learn that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is to let them fall, so they can finally learn how to stand up on their own. And you learn that true strength isn't about holding a broken family together. It's about having the courage to let it go, and to build something new and whole in its place, even if that new thing is just a quiet life, a peaceful home, and the simple, profound act of holding your father's hand in the afternoon sun. If you've ever been in a situation where your own family wouldn't listen, where you felt like you were screaming into the void, I want you to share your story in the comments below. We need to know we're not alone. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Do you think I went too far, or not far enough? Let's talk about it. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like, and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of injustice in the world, but there's also a lot of strength in fighting back, and those are the stories we need to keep telling.